previously, a series of children had disappeared. Pauline Reed, Keith Bennett, John Kilbride, and Leslie Ann Downing. Families searched desperately. Police followed every lead they could, but each investigation reached the same heartbreaking conclusion. There were no answers, no suspects, and no obvious connection between cases. And then in October 1965, everything changed. The 6th of October 1965, a house on Wardle Brick Avenue in Hattersley. 19-year-old David Smith had travelled there to visit his sister Maureen and her husband. It was supposed to be an ordinary family visit. Nothing suggested that, within the matter of hours, he would become a key witness to one of Britain's most significant criminal investigations. As the evening continued, another young man arrived at the house. His name was Edward Evans. He was 17 years old. Like everyone else in the room, he had no reason to believe he was in danger. What followed would later be examined in detail during one of Britain's most closely watched murder trials. David Smith later described witnessing a sudden attack on Edward Evans inside the house. Shocking and frightened by what he'd seen, he managed to leave. Rather than remaining silent, he attempted to deal with the situation himself. He went to seek help. It was a decision that would ultimately expose the crimes that had remained hidden for years. David Smith contacted the police. Officers responded expecting to investigate a serious assault. Instead, they were confronted with something far more disturbing. Inside the house, they discovered the body of Edward. The property was immediately secured as a crime scene. Detectives began documenting every room, every object, every possible piece of evidence. At that moment, their investigation centred around one murder. But experienced officers quickly realised there was unusual features to the case. As the searches continued, items recovered from the property raised important questions, and the investigation expanded. Police officers started to examine documents found inside the house, personal belongings, letters, photographs, notebooks, maps. Nothing could be dismissed. Every item was photographed, every item carefully catalogued. Investigators knew that evidence which appeared insignificant on its own could become crucial when viewed alongside something else. Now, forensic science in the 1960s was very different from today's standards. There was no DNA profiling, no digital database, and no computer system linking investigations across the country. Instead, detectives relied upon detailed note-taking, careful observation, and patient interviewing, and thousands of hours of painstaking police work. It was often slow and sometimes frustrating, but it remains one of the most effective investigations Britain has ever seen. As officers compared their discoveries with existing missing person files, certain names began to appear repeatedly. The dates, the locations, and the age of the missing children. Patterns started to emerge. Files that had sat on police cabinets for months or even years were suddenly being reopened. Investigators realised they could no longer treat the disappearances as isolated tragedies. For the first time, they began asking whether every missing child might be connected. It was a question no detective ever wanted to ask, because if the answer was yes, it meant several families had unknowingly become victims of the same investigation. Police now began conducting extensive interviews. Witnesses who had spoken months or even years earlier were contacted again. Old statements were reread, neighbours were interviewed, friends, work colleagues, family members. Every timeline was checked again. Every alibi was examined. Investigators searched for even the smallest inconsistency. There wasn't just about solving Edward's murder anymore. It became something far larger, one of the biggest criminal investigations Britain had ever undertaken. Although much of the investigation happened behind closed doors, news of the arrest quickly spread. Newspapers reported major developments. Television bulletins interrupted normal programming. People who had followed the missing children's cases for years sensed something significant was happening. Families who had spent months hoping for good news now faced the kind of uncertainty. They still didn't know what had happened to their loved ones, but for the first time, the police believed they might finally discover the truth. Detectives now had the suspects in custody. They had the evidence to examine and witnesses to question, and missing children whose families still desperately needed answers. There remained one question that investigators could not ignore. If these children had indeed been murdered, where were they? That question would lead detectives to a place that had already appeared in their inquiries. A place of vast open landscapes, deep peat and unpredictable weather. A place capable of hiding secrets for years. Saddleworth Moor. Next time, the investigation moves on to the moor. Search teams begin one of the largest recovery operations in Britain's criminal history, and detectives uncover evidence that finally begins to answer the questions family has asked for years. I'm Lisa, and this is Say It Anyway.